Thank you. The definition of boat people is people who flee the country by sea in order to seek refuge somewhere else, to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. I was a boat person, and I'd like to say to you is to be a boat person is not a choice. I was born and grew up during the Vietnam War, and the war ended in 1975. And in the aftermath, lives for us changed drastically, as if somebody pulled the rug from under our feet. My father was a chief of the police department. He was a lieutenant colonel. And the communist government put him in prison without a trial, without sentence. And we can only pray and hope for him to stay alive and that we will see him again someday. My father was taken away when I was a young girl. And when he was released, I was a woman at 25. My mother was a successful businesswoman, and her company, our house, were confiscated immediately. So we became homeless. My mom couldn't register a business or get a job with the government because of her husband's background. So to raise her 7 small children and take care of her mother and her mother-in-law, my mom had to join the black market. She traded medicines, automobile parts, or food, and risked being caught every day. The government constantly threatened to send us to areas where they call it new economic zones. Basically, it's rural land, uncultivated land in the countryside, where my mom knew that we won't be able to survive. So she continued to bribe all local authorities for us to stay in our hometown. Around us, thousands of people tried to escape. Many of our friends had left the country, but my mom didn't have the courage to put her children on a wooden boat and risk their lives in South China Sea. Until 1978, when Vietnam and Cambodia were at war, my mom realized that it's only a matter of time when her children will be drafted and sent to war. Afraid of losing her children in the battlefield, my mom was finally able to let go, knowing that she might not be able to see her children again. So that's when I became part of the Vietnam Exodus, an exodus of more than 1 million people, and 1 out of 3 perished. I was 16, and my sister and brother were 12 and 13. And this is how some of the Vietnamese boat people escaped. We got on this boat. There were 370 other people on board. We sat with knees to our chin for days. And then we were chased by pirates. Women, young girls, smear our face with vomit, with grease, with anything that would smell bad and look bad, hoping that the pirates would spare us. I forgot to mention to you that first night out, we were tossed about by violent storm, that we threw up on each other, relief on each other, and pray and cry together, and sat with that stench for the rest of the duration. So luckily, we got away from the pirates, and then we came to Malaysia shore only to be shot at by the military. They came on our boat, they robbed everything we had before they towed us out to sea. A soldier put an AK-47 to my brother's neck to demand the necklace. So for months in the refugee camp, I used to wake up at night screaming, "Đừng bắn, đừng bắn." It means don't shoot. Then we wandered down to Indonesia. We got lost. We ran out of food and water, and people started to die. I witnessed bodies being thrown to the ocean while their loved ones are crying and praying and screaming to hang on to their bodies so they can bury them. We got to this fishing village in Indonesia, and we sunk our boat so they could not send us back. Eventually, the local authorities took us to an uninhabited island and left us there, without food, without shelters. First, it was hunger and thirst that took lives. Every day somebody died, and then diseases spread, more people died. my sister, my brother, and I all got malaria and diarrhea. One night out in the open, a baby died, and I tried to bury her. Afterward, I held my sister's and my brother's hands, skin and bone, hot with high fever. I realized that death was near, death was real. Then I started to pray to God, and I said, God, please, don't let me die before them. I just cannot bear the thought of leaving them behind in this jungle defenseless. In retrospect, it was my sister and my brother that kept me alive. So eventually we were rescued by the Red Cross. Then 7 months later, we were given refuge in America. I came to America. I was freaked out because all Americans look alike. And then I was so depressed and fearful because I couldn't speak English. I didn't think I would make it. I thought surviving the jungle was easier. But when I started to make choices, I decided to make my parents' sacrifices worthwhile. So I learned English and finished high school in 2 years. And I gone straight to college with scholarships. Then I got a job. Then we were able to bring my parents and my siblings out of Vietnam. It took us 14 years to be reunited. When things settled down, I started to look back. Then I realized that there are people like myself who still have wounds that are unhealed, those who have lost their loved ones along the way. So I started out by going to the jungle when my cousin was buried 19 years before. He died after he escaped Vietnam, went to a jungle, and was taken away by malaria. So in this jungle, out of hundreds of unmarked graves, miraculously, I found my cousin's grave. I brought his remains back to his mom. I saw how she was transformed, how she was able to regain the will to live again. I thought, this is what I have to do. So I set out to take families from around the world every year since 2009 to look for graves of their loved ones. I cleared that jungle in order to find the graves. Otherwise, with naked eyes, you wouldn't know there were graves in those jungles, or graves that looked like that. That man there from California was 12 years old when he heard his mom die, and he always wanted to find her grave, and he finally got hold of me and asked me to please take him back to find his mom's grave, and we found it. That family there lost their young sister when she was 14. And when I brought this woman who was 87 years old, for 30 years she didn't give up the dream of looking for her husband's grave, and I thought I was making the right choice. How could I not take people like her to go back and find that closure, to find that peace, so they can move on? I'd like to share with you some of the choices that both people have made. This younger child in this picture is Lima Nguyen. She was born in the refugee camp. Her moms escaped, and luckily they were rescued at sea. Then she was taken to the refugee camp by a helicopter to give birth to her child. And the pilot asked her to name the child Lima if it was a girl. And so she did, but she didn't understand what Lima means. Meanwhile, Lima, for 20-some years, never knew where she was born except for an island named Gugu somewhere in Indonesia. A few years ago, somebody pointed my website to her, and that was the first time Lima got to see the picture of where she was born, and it happened to be the place where I was stranded in 1979. We were surrounded by jungle and water. We had nowhere to go and nothing to eat. At 16, not only I held a dead baby, but I also tried to help a woman deliver her child. So those are the kind of things that both people or refugees endure that you don't hear, because we don't often share these stories because it's too painful. So Lima growing up surrounded by stories of how her parents were tortured and persecuted for political reasons. So she was determined to be a human rights lawyer, so she can defend for victims of crimes against humanity, victims of persecution. So Lima then became a successful lawyer. Not only she handled very demanding jobs, but during her free time, she donated her time and effort and vacation to go to Cambodia and defend for victims of the Khmer Rouge. So her achievements had just recently earned her a prestigious award, the Prime Minister's Executive Endeavor Award. So people like Lima are around. Hoang Nam, a friend of mine, if he didn't escape, he would have been in prison like my father. His boat was ransacked by pirates. They threw their food away in search for valuables. They even took the shirt off his back. So when Hoang Nam got to the refugee camp, which was also a jungle, he was hungry for days, and hunger got the best of him. A TED speaker in America once said, hunger was humiliation. Hunger was hopelessness. And that's what Hoang Nam must have felt. In moment of weakness, he stole milk from a baby. And afterward, remorse, shameful. Hoang Nam vowed to take any job from anybody so he can stay alive and not to be hungry again. And when Hoang Nam came to Australia, he worked hard, he established a successful business, and he is now one of the most generous donors among the Vietnamese boat people that I know. He constantly helps people and generously lends a hand to those who need. The next person that I have recently had a privilege to meet is Helen Young. Helen escaped because her family were constantly persecuted and harassed by the government because of their ethnic Chinese background. When she escaped the first time, was caught and was sent to labor camp for 2 years. In those 2 years, Helen met a friend, and after they were released, they escaped together. They were attacked by pirates multiple times. Helen and the woman on that boat were brutally, repeatedly gang raped. And after they were finished, a few hours later, another group of pirates come around. Helen was about to jump into the water, but the thought of leaving her friend behind to be tortured alone had stopped her from ending her life. So Helen now lives in Perth, and she spends 6 days a week taking care of old people. She drives them to doctors, she buys them groceries, she keeps them company. She told me she even sings to them Chinese or Vietnamese, doesn't matter, keep them happy. Helen said, being alive is a gift, and now this is her way of giving back. When Helen shared with me these stories, I couldn't help myself from crying. I felt humbled by her humility. I was inspired by her strength. While I was crying uncontrollably, Helen was very calm. I think Helen had cried all her tears. I'd like to leave you with this notion that next time when you hear boat people, be inquisitive. Do wonder why they flee their homeland, probably left their loved ones behind. Why do they come here? Do wonder why, what it was like in their journey. When we hear a boat intercepted and 152 people on board, did we really hear how many of them start out with before they got here with 152 left? Be inquisitive. And do imagine how many Helen or Lima or Hoang Nam there might be among this new load of boat people. I thank you for listening.